Hi, I'm Emily Snyder. I'm the professor of oboe at George Mason University in Virginia and an oboist and the English hornist in the United States Air Force Band, Washington, D.C. I thought today we would chat a little bit about knives and knife sharpening because we know how crucial having a super sharp knife is to the whole reed making process. So first things first, I thought we could chat a little bit about the different types of knives. I like to use two different types of knives when I'm making reeds. I use a thicker knife, a beveled knife, when I'm starting out. So removing the bark, doing kind of the day one scrape sort of thing. You can see here it's a thicker edge here. There's one flat edge here and this beveled edge, hence the name beveled knife. I like to use this for most of the initial work. And then secondly, I like a finishing knife, something more along the lines of these. This is a Rigati knife. This is a very standard, very good quality knife. And this is your Landwell knife, double hollow ground Landwell. You can see the differences in the thickness there of these knives. So it's important to use the right knife for the right kind of work that you want to do. For purposes of today's video and talking about some sharpening techniques, I'm going to do a little demonstration of what I would use for the Rigati and the Landwell knives, because the beveled knives are sharpened differently with having only the one plane that you sharpen. I could talk about that at another time. Most people use this style of knife, so I'll go through this one today. So the important thing with knife sharpening is knowing what you're aiming for, right? We want a knife that's going to catch the cane. We're going to put the knife on the cane with just the weight of the knife and just move the knife across the cane, and it should want to lift the cane. We should never have to press or push into the cane. Oftentimes, people will scrape a reed and they'll take it out the next day and soak it, and they'll say, oh my goodness, the tip grew back. The tip didn't grow back on your piece of cane. What happened is maybe your knife wasn't super sharp, and as you were scraping it, you were actually compressing the fibers of your cane, and that the next day when you soak it, all of that cane that you thought you had removed by scraping is actually still there on the reed. So it's really important. You'll notice when you have a super sharp knife, that happens a little bit less. The other thing you'll notice is that if you are getting your tip of your reed frayed a lot, or you're losing corners or things like that, typically that's indicative of a dull knife, and we're having to press really hard to get it to do what we want, and that's when we rip off a corner of our reed. So hopefully following through some of this today will help alleviate those problems with your reed making. So first things first, with looking at the reed, this is coming from a right-handed reed maker perspective because I'm right-handed and I sharpen my knives right-handed. So if you're left-handed, just do the opposite of this. So what we want to do is, if we were to look at this knife with our microscopic glasses on to see the edge of the knife, we would see that right-handed scraper knives have something on the very edge of the knife that actually curls this way. It's called the burr. So as we are scraping on the cane, there's this little bit at the end that really helps lift the cane off the reed. And that's the burr formation is super important because a knife won't feel sharp unless that burr is going the right way. So how do we get the burr going the right way? So I like to do kind of a two-step process with knife sharpening using a stone and a steel rod. So let's go over what you do first with the stone. What's really crucial when you use a sharpening stone on your knife is you have to maintain a consistent sharpening angle with your knife. That is critical. One of the biggest problems I see with young reed makers, oboists, is that they're putting the knife on the stone and the angle of the knife is waffling back and forth, even if it's not that dramatic. While they're doing it back and forth, that cannot happen. It has to be completely locked in at an angle. I recommend a two-stroke method for doing this. So again, right-handed. So the first stroke that we're going to do is towards our body, and that's going to be at a lower angle. And then we're going to push the cutting edge away from our body at a slightly higher angle. And I'm an oboist, and we like to be kind of precise about these things. So for me, I aim for a 21-degree angle on the stroke towards my body, and then a slightly higher 23-degree angle on the stroke away from my body, so that it pushes that burr, because it's a slightly higher number, over to the right side of the knife. So I'll show you what that looks like. So here we go. So around roughly 21 degrees, light pressure, light to medium pressure, keeping the edge of the knife on the stone that whole time. Then we're going to do the other angle, the higher angle, pushing away. You can see that I'm really trying to like move my body as a whole. When I do that, I'm not trying to like use my wrists because that's going to create a lot of variation in our angle. And that already, this knife was medium sharp to begin with, has created a really nice burr. And we use our thumbnail to check the sharpness of the knife because our thumbnail is very similar to the density of a piece of cane, and that way it saves our reeds. So we can just test it on our thumbnail, and our thumbnail grows back and it's okay. So that feels really grabby to me already. If your knife is more dull than maybe this one was to begin with, you may have to do that a couple times. A low angle towards you, slightly higher angle away from you. You always want to end with the stroke away from you if you're right-handed. One other thing you can do is very, very carefully use the pad of your finger to tap kind of the edge of your knife to feel. It should feel almost like Velcro, like there's something grabbing the edge of your knife. If you don't feel something grabbing, don't worry. It just means you need to do more removal of the steel on the end of the knife. It could take several passes, especially if your knife's older or if it just hasn't been sharpened in a while. So that's part one, using this stone. This is a ceramic stone, by the way. The next thing I highly recommend for reed makers is getting one of these. This is a steel burnishing rod. Most double reed retailers sell these in some capacity. I like this one because it has a coarse side and a fine side. And this is fantastic because this really saves the life of your knife, because anytime we're using our knife on a stone, we're removing metal from the knife. You can see on my stone here, there's a little bit of like metal dust on there. But with the burnishing rod, the steel rod, it doesn't remove any metal from the knife. It's simply just bending, reshaping that burr of the knife. And a lot of times we'll be scraping and we don't quite need to put an entire new edge on the knife yet. We just need to reform that burr so that it catches again. So if we can think of all the time we're saving by not putting grinding a new edge on the knife with the stone, but just rebending it with this, it's an amazing savings. So to use this, it's the same sort of process. I like to keep it pretty flat to reduce extra variation. Same thing, we're going to start with the stroke towards our body at a low angle, medium pressure, and then away from our body at a slightly higher angle. Again, trying to keep everything locked. I'm not wiggling my wrist. I'm keeping it like a vice grip. Boom, and then away from our body. And then with the burnishing rod, I like to do one extra away from my body stroke at a slightly like 1 or 2 degrees higher, just to fully encourage that burr to bend. And now this should be pretty grabby. And it is. Just the weight of the knife, not using my hands for any downward pressure, and it's grabbing. It's grabbing my thumb. So I know it's ready to be used for reed making. So hopefully that all helped. Best of luck with your reed making endeavors, and I hope you have a great day.